Mick Foley is a patient, gentle man, but there is something that makes him angry. When people say wrestling is fake. He hates when they dismiss his beloved sport, his profession, his passion. He hates when people treat it as some kind of joke, when they don't take it seriously, because his bruises, lost teeth, and lacerations were not fake. Foley silenced his critics. He did things that nobody could call fake. Everything to prove that the wrestling business is not a scam. Life-threatening falls, real pain, and real injuries. Disaster took its course.
I can see myself standing there watching him fall. And then thinking in my head, just move, Mick, move.
We didn't watch it, we believed it.
The collateral damage that ensued is another story.
You pay all day long for the decisions you make in your 15 minutes in Spotlight.
Until you saw it, you didn't believe that a person could physically do this and live.
Mick Foley cheated death multiple times.
Mick Foley sacrifices more of his body than any other performer at that level.
He is a hardcore wrestling icon. Blood, chair shots, thumbtacks. His career is marked by mortal danger.
Mick Foley, who's crazier than crazy. I mean, you can't get any crazier than Mick Foley.
Legitimate. He brought a pain tolerance like no other man that I've been around.
This documentary answers the question of why Foley did what he did. Why these dangerous bumps? Why this incredible brutality?
I'm lucky I'm here after that. There's no reward big enough to cover that risk. For me, it was all about the reactions. The eyes lighting up, my desire to be authentic. I definitely wanted to be loved.
Many people think Mick Foley is crazy, a self-mutilating psychopath. But the real reason behind Foley's madness is complex, because he's actually a completely normal guy.
A lot of times, I'll just go back and think about all the questions I was asked over those 20 years. Does it hurt? Were you some sort of psychopath? Some sort of masochist? You seem like such a normal guy. Why would you do that to yourself?
Mick Foley looks ordinary, average, but he has something that makes him special, the ability to endure unendurable pain. And that has earned him millions.
An average human being cannot live through that ordeal. And obviously, Mick Foley was far from being an average human being.
He doesn't have an impressive physique. There is no star aura. People like him don't normally become internationally renowned stars. But Foley had a dream. He wanted to earn money with wrestling, so he had to stand out somehow. And he did that by doing what nobody else would even consider.
I was taking a large risk with my body, just hoping and betting that it would set my family up for a good future.
Mick's top priority was to look after his family.
Everybody in the locker room knew that he wasn't a party guy. He was not a go-out guy. He was a family guy.
I think it was accepted that I was a guy that stayed in, did a lot of reading, visited museums, battlefields.
The guys would be going out to strip bars, and he would be running, trying to catch the last flight and be home for the kids.
I felt pretty good about having my priorities in the right order. I was trying to be the best dad I could possibly be.
Mick did everything he could to make sure his family had it good. But his family didn't have it good. The violence his children were exposed to, again and again, traumatized them to some extent. Foley's daughter, Noelle, no longer remembers parts of her childhood, especially when it comes to her father's wrestling career. She says she is still repressing it today.
Part of me thinks I blocked that out of my life.
That is what he regrets most. Not the scars and the physical damage, it's the pain of his children's souls, the sleepless nights of his worried wife. And if he could go back, that's exactly what he would change. As a child, Foley had a formative experience playing with the children next door.
In diving for someone who had the ball, their heel kicked me in the bottom of the lip and it bled profusely. And I remember seeing the reactions of people when they saw my blood and not disliking it.
His friends were fascinated by the blood. If a boy could withstand a lot of pain without crying or complaining, that was considered cool. Mick endured a lot of pain, even the pain of bullying.
You wear the same clothes every day, you never comb your hair, you're fat. You have the body of a bowling pin.
I guess I've always been self-deprecating. I was never really comfortable with the way I looked. I was always heavy-set, and I got teased a lot about it. So I was beating people to the punchline before they could make their own punchline about me.
Mick argued a lot with his father growing up, but there was something that always reconciled the two of them, no matter how fierce their argument got.
We both struggled a little bit to find ways to bond, and it was really wrestling. That was like the glue that held that relationship together through that 3-year period. That was the one thing, you know, maybe we didn't get along the rest of the week, but when it came time Saturday night, you know, hey, Dad, you want to watch wrestling with me? And the answer was always yes.
Like most wrestlers, Mick began his career as a fan.
Everyone who gets into wrestling is looking for something that they find missing in their own lives. For me, I mean, I was teased a lot, so I had an overwhelming need to be liked. I had it on my mind all the time. It's really all I wanted to do or watch was professional wrestling.
Mick started his wrestling training. Of course, every wrestler also needs a character, a role that he embodies. Mick's mentor had a scary idea.
Robert Fuller says, "Remind me of that Manson feller." I was like, "Rob, I do not want to be associated with Charles Manson." He says, "Not too many good paying jobs in this business. A man like you could ride a good gimmick a long way." I decided if I'm going to be this guy, I'm going to do the best job at being this guy that I can be.
As Cactus Jack Manson, Mick embodied a creepy killer, a character that reminded viewers of horrific headlines.
That's got to be the most bizarre individual I've ever been around in World Championship
Wrestling. He's a sociopath. He's a psychopath. A monster! Ah!
Foley managed to make people hate him. When he went outside after a show in Texas, he found his car's tires were all slashed. Others would have been scared, but Mick took it as a compliment. Clear proof that he was having success as a heel. That evening he walked to his motel. It was a cheap place to stay. Other wrestlers had expensive cars and checked into suites with jacuzzis. Foley's career, on the other hand, started in cheap hotel rooms.
Something I accepted from the very beginning. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to have to learn to live with a lot of pain, you know, and then my definition of what a lot of pain was, we kept getting more extensive.
Chasing his dreams, Foley competed all over the world. His matches in Japan were particularly brutal. For example, the C4 match against Terry Funk, with real explosives.
There's an audience for slasher movies. There's an audience for horror movies. A lot of people really love that genre.
When I landed on those explosives, felt like a shotgun. I felt like I'd been shot. Like, we were both in the hospital after that match. I was bleeding in so many places that I don't even remember that I've been burned. It doesn't even occur to me until I'm on the plane the next day.
He walks into the house, sits down. I said, "Mick, I think there's a fire. Something's burning."
I took off my jacket. I said, "It's me." And I wrestled 2 days later.
In a match in Germany, Foley lost an ear. in a botched move.
You know, we're trying to create the illusion of hanging by my neck. And the way we create that illusion is I'm actually going to hang by my neck. But on this night, I couldn't get the ropes apart. They were too tight.
No, I'm not exaggerating when I say I thought I was going to die in there. It was so tight on the ropes were so tight on my neck.
Right.
So when I pulled out,
and I felt like I was a fox in a trap. You know, my right ear did not come with me.
After the match, Mick called his wife.
I've got some good news and some bad news. I said, hey, I'm coming home early. She said, what's the bad news? I said, one of my ears is not going to be coming with me. I can't even wear glasses because my ear's missing. I'm hardcore. Let me just put this pen behind my ear. Oops.
On ECW, Foley asked the crowd for a chair during a match. This interaction led to an iconic moment that made it into many compilations, because it didn't stop at one chair.
Mick was always offended by people's expectations because they were always too low. Mick knew how great he was.
WWE scouts took notice of Foley, but boss Vince McMahon was no friend of Foley and his extreme style.
I didn't know at the time that Mr. McMahon had not been a big fan of mine. Jim Ross was pushing for me. Mr. McMahon slammed his hand down on the table, said, all right, I'll bring him in, but I'm covering up his face.
Oh, yeah. This mask, the best thing that ever happened to me.
Mick Foley became Mankind, an iconic character.
And on the 8th day, God created mankind. Why was he having such a bad day?
His hollow eyes reflected his painful childhood. His only friends were rats.
It was sort of like a lost soul in a sense. As an 11-year-old, I was like, man, this guy's freaking crazy.
To me, it always reminded me of Hannibal Lecter.
When I can't get up, when my little boy says, Daddy, I want to play ball, and I can't do it. Is that where the fun starts? Is it where a doctor injects a 12-inch needle into the discs in my spine so I can wrestle one more day? Whoopee!
Vince thought it was great because it was real.
Mankind is more than a mask. He is the echo of the Attitude Era. A walking contradiction, traumatized and pitiable, but also mercilessly brutal.
You know, to see this guy in this crazy mess actually pulling his own hair out. I mean, and he really pulled his hair out, right?
In the ring, he mesmerized fans with barbaric performances. Behind the scenes, he mesmerized company executives with his gentle and intelligent demeanor.
A lot of people were surprised of the fact of, again, how articulate he was and thoughtful and how well-spoken he was, because just from the sheer stuff that they had seen, you thought that this guy was masochistic. I mean, he was, but, you know, there was all another side of him.
Mankind, you will never rest in peace.
Mankind's feud with The Undertaker was one of the most memorable rivalries ever. Two mysterious, dark characters clashed in brutal combat. For example, in the Boiler Room Brawl.
I know there's some cardboard boxes that I'm hoping are going to break my fall. They do to some extent, but half my body doesn't land on those boxes, right? I undershoot it just a little bit.
It was falls like this that made veterans uncomfortable. They repeatedly tried to persuade Mick to stop, but he remained unconvinced.
Yeah, sorry about a couple of potatoes.
A potato in wrestling speak is a really stiff blow, above and beyond what we usually deliver. And sometimes in our urgency to have a great match, we might serve up a couple potatoes.
The climax of the storyline made wrestling history and will still be talked about 100 years from now.
He says, what do you think about throwing me off the top of the cell? I was like, no, you're crazy. Didn't want any part of it.
2 weeks, I asked him, every night, 2 weeks, he would shoot that down.
And he was adamant.
It's 4 o'clock. Foley is gripping the phone in his hand, dialing the same number he has dialed so many times before. He is calling to warn his wife about tonight. He wants her and the children to know tonight is going to be particularly bad. A 16-foot cage. Hell. In a cell.
The cage is attached just like a chain link fence in your yard. They had like metal twisteds that secured the actual mesh to the pole.
They had attached the top section of the cage with zip ties. But there's 600 pounds of human beings up there.
I attempt to suplex the Undertaker on top of that dilapidated cell, and brother, he shot that shit down in a hurry.
What followed became one of the most legendary moments in WWE history.
There's very little margin for error. I look at this incredibly small table.
I'm just standing there at the top of the cell. In my head, it's an eternity. Like, Mick, move.
I was cursing and screaming and calling him an effing idiot. Why are you doing this?
Fans and wrestlers later said it felt like they had just seen a car crash. Many were in a state of shock.
We had 2 young children at the time. All I kept saying was, oh, it's fake, just to soothe them. Yet in the back of my mind, I'm freaking out. How do you tell your children, oh, daddy's acting? Laying there lifeless, motionless. This was not expected at all.
Foley was physically broken, but happy that he survived the fall. What he didn't know at the time was that the worst was yet to come. The plan was for Undertaker to chokeslam Mick on the top of the cage and for the cage to hold. But the wire snapped and Foley took another life-threatening bump.
When Mick hit that panel and the panel just broke away, and it was such a violent and just at a whole nother level, a violent bump that he took. He rotates another few inches, he don't get up.
I thought that was the end of him.
What his wife didn't know was that the second fall wasn't supposed to happen like that.
I thought he had planned this whole thing. I was cursing and yelling at him.
I remember her screaming and I don't think she knew that part was going to happen.
When Foley crashed through the cage, a chair fell off the roof as well and hit him in the face full force. It knocked out a tooth, which then stuck in his nose.
Every foot of the way, it smashes into my face, to this day. Still missing those teeth. Then one of them ends up lodged in my nostril.
When Foley laid motionless on the ground, colleagues thought he was dead. First and foremost, his friend Terry Funk.
I looked at him, looked down at him, and I said, turned around to the referee and said, he's out, he's gone, it's over. He's not going to get up. I was scared to death.
When we really put that in perspective, mankind could have died that day. This was a guy that was willing to die.
At this point, the only rational decision would be to abandon the match, or at least accept it when others stopped the match. But Foley is different. He wanted to see it through to the end.
Incredible dedication to getting over the finish line by whatever means it took, and it's this strange thing because obviously things went wrong, didn't go like we'd hoped.
That evening made Foley a legend, but he paid a heavy price.
My shoulder was dislocated, my jaw was dislocated, I had 14 stitches underneath my lip. Vince walked in and he said, Mick, you have no idea how much I appreciate what you've just done to this company. but I never want to see anything like that again.
Once again, Foley had demonstrated that wrestling is not fake. But even after the insanity of Hell in a Cell, fans kept questioning his credibility. For example, at a later meet and greet,
some kind of tough guy, and he goes, hey, I noticed when the Undertaker threw you off that cell that you landed on a table. And he leans forward, he whispers in my ear, he goes, it broke your fall, didn't it? And I realized he was on to me. I said, yeah, it did. So he goes, so you didn't get hurt? And I went, not at all. And I leaned forward and whispered in his ear and I said, it was a magic table.
Outwardly, Foley smiles at such comments, but on the inside, it still annoys him to hear people label wrestling as fake.
It took me about 5 minutes to get out of my car and going, and I limped so noticeably, and the guy goes, yeah, I guess that wrestling really takes its toll on you, huh? And I go, yeah. And he goes, did you ever get hurt? Like, it's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Wrestling is not fake. It is scripted entertainment. Parts of the match and its outcome are scripted, but you can't fake gravity. There is no false floor, no hidden mattress. The wrestlers try not to hurt themselves, but that doesn't make wrestling harmless. To make this clear, Mick Foley took the danger of wrestling to the extreme.
And I thought, well, I know how much it hurts to land in the ring. How is he doing that?
I did think to myself, what if I created a style that had no loopholes, where no one looking at a VHS tape, no matter how many times they fast forwarded slow motion, could find a secret. The secret is I was really getting hurt. Like, ta-da, there's my magician's secret. Like, yeah, if it looked like it hurt, it's because it did.
Things like that are the reason why there's nothing left of Foley's hip bone today. Veterans saw this coming and they warned him.
People were genuinely concerned for Mick, like, Mick, don't take this crazy bump tonight. Mick would have a sly grin. It's like, thanks, but no thanks.
I did not enjoy the pain. I enjoyed the fact that I could take it and sell it in a way that was fun.
Foley's style raised questions about wrestling. How far should wrestlers go to make fans believe what they're seeing? How safe can wrestling be without becoming fake? And where is the threshold of brutality that must never be crossed?
Scripted doesn't resonate with the sports entertainment crowd because the sports entertainment crowd is always aching for something real.
Realism was a big tool. I didn't think I was having a good match unless I had trouble getting back to my hotel room.
Foley's reckless wrestling style was harshly criticized behind the scenes, for example by Ric Flair. An unpleasant conflict ensued.
Even to this day, I don't like stuff like that. I said, you're not going to be able to walk when you're 30 years old. You know what I mean? Don't do any of that. You don't need to. It's not wrestling.
Flair and Foley didn't like each other. Their wrestling styles were different. So was their understanding of what was entertaining in the ring and what was too much.
When I wrote my book, I said, you're a 300-pound stuntman. I wanted him to take it personally. His wife is beautiful, kids were young and beautiful, We get hurt enough.
For Foley, these accusations were painful. He loved what he did, but Flair verbally spat on him and his work. Flair was trash-talking Foley in the locker room. Word spread quickly about his disrespectful remarks.
But he's so sensitive. I went to him one time, I said, you don't need to do that every night.
Sure, I was sensitive to that type of criticism because I felt like I knew what I was capable of doing, and I didn't feel like I'd even scratched the surface. I wanted to prove people wrong. I wanted to prove that I could succeed, that I could be something special.
At some point, Foley was able to win Flair over. This pain tolerance even impressed Ric Flair.
There's kind of like a matter of personal pride where you don't actually go to the emergency room unless you really need it.
What really impressed Flair was that Foley was willing to sacrifice so much to entertain the crowd.
He loves the business. And that was my resolve. He just loves the business.
And Foley's acting talent impressed many. He was phenomenal at telling stories and embodying characters.
One of the things that makes Mick an incredible performer is his ability to take characters and morph them into who he is, but then also be able to deliver any kind of match that you want.
I think you know the guy. His name is Cactus Jack.
His character, Cactus Jack, stood for the hardcore style. He was characterized by a willingness to take risks and his physical toughness in the ring. Another character, Dude Love, was the complete opposite. A self-confident womanizer, an easygoing charmer, and sunny dreamer who takes life as it comes.
To simultaneously be able to pull off 3 different characters at the same time, that's really difficult to do.
When he shifts his personality into that guy, it's a whole different world.
Mankind, Cactus Jack, Dude Love, didn't matter which character he was portraying, you had a level of Mick Foley in all of them.
Even though Foley delivered in terms of storytelling, even though the fans were fascinated by his work, he never got a chance to be the company's top guy. Vince McMahon and his advisors thought Foley wasn't marketable enough, not muscular and charismatic enough compared to guys like The Rock.
People like me don't reach the peak until we do.
On Monday Night Raw, Mankind took on the arrogant heel champion, The Rock, in a title match. Foley was clearly the underdog. But to everyone's surprise, Steve Austin interfered in the match, paving the way for the fan favorite to win the title.
We're talking about a deafening roar, unlike anything I've experienced. It's so loud you could barely think.
Foley was now at the very top. Nobody wanted to believe that he would one day win the World Championship, but he did, and the crowd went wild. But what happened weeks later made their blood run cold.
Buddy, you know Doc is Daddy's friend, right? He's not gonna do anything to really hurt Daddy, right? You're not gonna be scared, right?
Foley wanted his family to see him as champion, so he invited them to watch his next WWE title match live at ringside. They were going to watch the I Quit match against The Rock. Afterwards, they wanted to go to Disneyland. Foley's wife and children took their seats in the front with an excellent view of the carnage. The line had been crossed. It was too much for Foley's family. The WWE cameras didn't show the tears, but an independent documentary film crew from beyond the mat did.
It was very traumatic to me. Like, how could these 11 shots change my dad's health? Like, if you were to get 11 headshots, a normal person probably could have died. It's sickening, honestly. I really, really hate the I Quit match.
It got worse with each merciless chair shot. Foley allowed himself to be brutally beaten that evening and suffered demonstrable brain damage in front of his loved ones, all for the entertainment of strangers.
It was horrible, and they were stitching him up, and Mick is talking like nothing happened.
The next morning, the family went to Disneyland. They mingled with all the happy families and thousands of bright-eyed children. But it wasn't really a nice day, because Foley's children saw the huge stitched-up scar on their dad's forehead, and they couldn't help but think about last night.
You know, I'm an old school guy. That night, even I was uncomfortable with the amount of chair shots that Mick took.
From today's perspective, these chair shots to the head are even scarier than they were back then. because the current state of research on concussions and head trauma shows the serious implications of these injuries.
Researchers believe there's only one way to get CTE, and that is repeated hits to the head. There's no known cure. It is like Alzheimer's. It can start with memory loss, mood swings, and difficulty in concentration, developing into progressive dementia, even possible thoughts of suicide. But unlike Alzheimer's, CTE can also result in significant aggression and lack of impulse control.
That is a long-term effect of repetitive concussions and brain trauma. We don't really know how my dad will be doing in 10, 20 years or so.
If you're wondering if I'm worried about that, yeah, really worried. Every day I worry about that.
Foley underwent medical brain scans. The results were shocking.
I had independent neurologists and WWE's neurologists both confirming the same diagnosis, which is I should never wrestle again.
He'd drive around and not remember where he lived. It's concussion on top of concussion on top of concussion.
In a final Hell in a Cell match, Foley took on Triple H. He lived up to his hardcore career, a legendary career that came to an end at the age of just 35. In a memorable moment, Foley crashed through the roof of the cell one more time. Then, Triple H ended Mick Foley's career with a pedigree. Mick's career began in the cheapest motels with joy and enthusiasm, and it ended in a luxury hotel with a deep sadness.
I went to a much nicer hotel than I otherwise would have stayed in, had a nice room service meal, sat on my bed and cried like a baby because it was over.
Mick was no longer the same without wrestling. His passion, his purpose in life was still to get into the ring, but he couldn't anymore, and that made him depressed.
I would wake up and I would just know this doesn't even have the potential of being a good day.
There is no therapy for an addiction to the limelight. Many wrestlers go through depression after their career is over. The love of wrestling cannot be switched off like a light on the ceiling. What remains of a brutal, dangerous, and self-destructive career, except a filled bank account and fading cheers?
I felt like nothing I had done made any difference. Nothing I've done has meant a thing.
Foley realized that he couldn't do without wrestling. It was his purpose in life. At least that's what he thought at the time. He only found out later what his real purpose in life was. But back then, he didn't know the way out of his wrestling withdrawal symptoms. So he returned and fought in dangerous matches against Randy Orton and Edge. Then his path led him to a smaller promotion called TNA, but over time, he fell apart.
I was the guy who was used to being able to take anything, and I got to a point where almost every single thing was hurting me. I no longer looked forward to matches. I just wanted them to be over with.
With each year, the pain got worse until the strain on his body became unbearable. Nevertheless, Foley stayed away from painkillers and drugs as far as possible.
I don't know how he's done all the years without drinking. He doesn't drink enough. That's really upsetting.
Foley was never the type to run from his pain. While other wrestlers resorted to narcotics, Foley chose to tough it out. He didn't need drugs, just like he didn't need wrestling. For a long time, Mick thought this was his purpose in life. Then, when he hung up his boots, he became depressed. But Mick's real passion, his real purpose in life, was hidden behind wrestling. Because what really fulfills him is making others happy.
Mick is a Santa Claus all year round. Anyone with that kind of mentality wants to give, wants to make people happy. That's Mick Foley. That's what Mick's all about.
This attitude pushed him. He wanted to make the fans happy. and the fans responded especially well to daring, dangerous moves, and also to brutality. He went further than anyone else to see a smile or awe on people's faces.
He was willing to put it all on the line, and he wanted it for the fans. And he's always been like that.
He will write letters as Santa Claus to my kids every year in a fountain pen, will come over as Santa just to be caught sneaking out of the house so that my kids still believe they're Santa.
Wrestling was just a means to an end, to make others happy. That's what he does now, and it brings him peace.
I can honestly say I feel better now than I did 15 years ago.
Sometimes Mick Foley is seen backstage at WWE events. He hugs his old colleagues, gives tips to young talents, and hobbles slowly through the corridors. He used to walk these same corridors a little faster, back in the day, but also full of nervousness and tension, and searching. Today he is leisurely, but content. He looks less and less like an international star, but everyone in wrestling respects him. The veterans behind the curtain would never forget how much he put on the line and how much he sacrificed for wrestling and for the entertainment of the fans.
My life would not be the same without you, and that's the truth. Thank you, man.
Mick Foley's life today is unspectacular compared to the height of his career. He enjoys spending time with his family. As a dad, he is the lovable teddy bear who always likes to mess around. And every now and then, he sits in the garden and remembers the days when he cheated death multiple times.
I can never drop an elbow again. I've got a ball of steel where my hip used to be, but that's a relatively small price to pay for having had the chance to live out my dreams.
Durante décadas, Eddie había dado todo por la lucha libre. Había sacrificado su cuerpo para levantar los brazos en triunfo como campeón. Fue un momento de alivio. Se quitó un gran peso de encima, al menos momentáneamente. En ese momento, Eddie era una ruina física,